Hi. Dini has most generously given me about 5 minutes to speak to you. Maybe I'll stretch it to 10. But I'm missing coming to the national conference, and I hope the team from India, the young people who are there, will be able to inform you, and I hope they'll learn from you and you'll get some information out of them that you want. Briefly, what I thought I will do today is go over some of the programs that we've been running that you're familiar with and trace the history of these programs a little bit, see what we have achieved and where we want to go. So the first choice obviously is Read India. This is the real bread and butter of Pratham. The idea of Read India came up almost in 2002 when we first innovated an indigenous technique to teach children how to read. Many of you may not know that we don't teach reading as a separate skill in India. And this is something that Pratham has been developing. I think we have come to a point now where we know how to teach children how to read. Now, Devyani and others will be able to show you some data which is actually saying that our mass scale work to teach children to read is almost becoming predictable like an industrial process, and so we should be able to tweak it, fine tune it and make it more productive as we go along. The purpose of Read India is dual. When individual donors give money to Pratham, we tell them how many thousand children will be taught to read and so on. But that is to make sure that we remain accountable to a very measurable goal. But the larger purpose of Read India is not to teach those thousand or few thousand or few 100,000 children, but rather to impact the policy of the Indian government and the practice in Indian government and private perhaps schools, so that reading becomes a necessary part of primary education. In other words, we want the children to learn to read maybe by the end of the second or third grade and become real fluent readers by the time they finish their fifth grade. And the happy news is that after struggling for many years now, the Government of India through the Planning Commission and now through the Ministry of Human Resource Development has actually come around to our position, and they are telling the states that schools should be focusing on learning outcomes, particularly reading and math, something that we have been saying. And as you know, the ASAR survey is a prime instrument of advocacy where we want to tell the government how bad the situation is, want to inform the general public what the situation is, so that people start thinking that schooling is not just schooling is not learning. So this is where we are at today. What I see happening over the next few years, regardless of who forms the government in 2014, is that this change will stay. That the government henceforth will focus on basic outcomes of reading, writing, arithmetic. Maybe some additional competencies will be included. But this is going to be the focus for the next few years to come. And we already see the signs of governments coming and talking to us and saying, how can you help us once again? We did this way back in 2006, 7, 8, and then we sort of were pushed back by the Right to Education Act and so on, because of which we could not continue to do the same thing. But now they've all come a full circle, and we are working with the government of Bihar, Maharashtra, West Bengal, likely in Odisha, Chhattisgarh and so on, Madhya Pradesh, where the state governments will again pick up from us the methodology, the technique, even the philosophy of why reading, how to teach reading. And I suspect that we will be able to go on a much larger scale on reading once again. You may have noticed that now Read India is operating on two levels. It always was, but now it is even more noticeable, because when we work in a block of 100 villages, we are trying to go deep so that we measure the children's reading ability and make sure that all children become fluent readers up to at least a story level. Now that means we have to focus more resources, time and money on a relatively smaller scale. But the payoff is that when this becomes effective, then the state governments say, this is what we want, and then you can leverage what you've done on a relatively small scale to a much bigger scale. So henceforth, don't be surprised if the direct teaching numbers actually become smaller, maybe down to a couple of 100,000 children every year in the direct block programs, but the scale-up promise with the states picking up Read India programs or Read India-like programs will bring in the bigger numbers. We'll keep the two separate, unlike before when we said 33 million children, everything was put in one basket. I don't think that's justified anymore. We should be looking at the two numbers separately. The second flagship program of Pratham is, as you know, the annual status of education report. We have already completed 9 years of ASER, and some of you still call it ASER. Please don't do that. It is ASER, as in effect, impact. After 9 years, we are trying to see where ASER is going to go. I don't think we've reached the decision yet. But the interesting thing is that ASER is now becoming more and more active in supporting Pratham's measurements. Again, our team will be able to tell you how the measurement, monitoring and evaluation team is active in helping us with looking at data, analytics and so on. What that means is we are actually developing a strong arm of monitoring, measurement and evaluation, which in the longer run, and probably starting next year or year beyond that, could start offering services outside, and that's not only to earn money out of it, but actually spread the culture of measurement and evaluation based on evidence that is missing in India today. So ASER's promise, on the one hand, is to do large-scale assessment across the country, which has become exemplary now globally, and people are talking about doing ASER-like household surveys in many countries, because that seems to give a very quick understanding of the situation as regards learning outcomes. But going forward, we may change tracks a little bit and perhaps focus on individual research and studies in India while we go outside in other countries, especially in Africa, and replicate the nationwide ASER in those countries. I'm not saying we have taken a decision on this in India yet, but ASER will definitely, again, like in Read India, go deeper into the subject, more research, more analysis, and on the other side, again, keep on going on wide scale, including going globally. Recently, we have received a grant from the Hewlett Foundation to set up an international unit to take what we do in ASER to other countries. And that unit has already started functioning, and I expect that over the next few years, maybe we'll be interacting with 50, 70 countries around the world, especially in the Middle East, some Latin American countries and in Africa. So the third program I want to talk to you about is vocational training, and I know there's a lot of excitement building in the United States and Pratham USA around what we are doing in the vocational training space. It is something that individual donors always like, because the results are tangible, immediate, unlike in Read India. In Read India we say a child has learned to read, and here we tell people how many young men and women have been trained and have started working on a job. Yes, this is why we want to expand the vocational training program, and it's going to expand. Already this year, we've moved to about 7,000-8,000 young people being trained and placed on jobs, and we are expecting that we'll go to about 20,000 people trained and placed on jobs in the next year or two at the most. Aditi will probably object to my saying 2 years, but 1 year is what we aspire for. It may take 2 years depending upon a lot of constraints in how we handle them. The interesting thing about this is that in India, the new corporate social responsibility law is likely to pour in much more money into education and vocational training space as well. And we are already seeing interest from various business houses in this program. And we expect that the growth will not be limited by funds. I know that you are going to raise a lot of money and give us, so that should not be the constraint. But there will be a constraint on human resources. How do we create trained trainers to train others? And there is always a shortage of good trainers, shortage of experienced people who can train others. And this will be a difficult hurdle to overcome. But as always, we are trying to be innovative to see how we can work out a solution. Information technology could be an answer, but definitely we are going to move forward and grow in numbers as far as vocational training is concerned. Now, why the number 20,000? Well, it's a nice number. But I personally feel if we can reach that number of 20,000 people trained and placed, which cannot be done only in 1 or 2 states, we will have cracked the real solution. Let me present some problems. For example, is it necessary to train somebody for 3 months in the residential school to give them a hospitality job as a training? The answer to that is, in my mind, is that no, it is not required. If this person comes to the residential center with some preparation, then this 3-month period can be cut down to perhaps 1.5 to 2 months time. 1.5 will be ideal. Then that means that the cost per person for training can be cut down from $300 to maybe under $200. If we can do that, then naturally the productivity improves. We have some other issues that we need to take care of. For example, after the young people are trained and they're placed in jobs, the working conditions are such that they do leave the first job and go to another job or just plain come back home. Now, we've just started with the help of some donors in California a program for post-placement services, which also works as a research program. We'll have sufficient data within a year's time to get a handle on how to curb attrition and how to improve retention of these new employees in the jobs, so that overall the picture is satisfactory, from resourcing the person, recruiting the person in the village, to training and to placing, so that they can build a career. I think when I said 20,000 people trained and placed will help us crack a on-scale solution, I mean we need to find micro problems and make sure that we know how to handle the entire supply chain of training. If we can do that, I think we can go to the next higher level. And at that point, I don't think money will remain a constraint, because more and more people will be attracted to a solution that works. Just like we find that in education programs that we have, because they work, more and more corporates in India and donors abroad are contributing to our work. The fourth program to talk about is the Pratham Open School for Education. Over the last couple of years, I've been fascinated by the issue that 70% of the children in Indian schools today will not go beyond 10th grade anyways. And many people drop out, do not complete 10th standard. So what do we do about this 70%? Of course, we are helping them learn to read better and learn arithmetic better. But after all that, their knowledge and skill sets around 10th standard or 12th grade will not be high enough to be able to, by themselves, enter the job market. So what do we do? So open schooling, community college, community school kind of mechanisms is what have been coming to my mind. And we've started experimenting with the open school for education in the space of secondary education, where young women who have dropped out of secondary schools or before that can complete their 10th grade education with certification. There's some very interesting findings while we are doing this. The pass-fail rate in the state board exam is a different matter, and I'm sure my colleagues will be able to tell you more about that. But the interesting thing is that we did some surveys, census surveys, door-to-door surveys, covering entire villages in Gujarat, Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh. And what we found, and this should be good news, is that in village after village after village, the proportion of 16 to 20-year-olds who have dropped out of school before 8th grade is almost negligible, very small. And that's going to reduce as we go forward. So the proportion of girls, young women and men who complete 8 years of education is going to grow henceforth. The problem is that even after staying in school for 8 years, they will not have learned much more. So now we have to find ways of figuring out how to address the issue. What is the problem? I frankly don't know what the exact problem is. You could say that they don't complete high school, but even those who complete high school don't know much. So that is not the problem. So I'm, at this moment, truly speaking, I'm trying to define the problem. Is it vocational training only? You mean to say none of these people can become scientists and engineers? Very difficult to say. So I think this is a new area of education that is going to be much in demand over the next decade or so, because more and more kids will go to 8th grade or up to 10th grade and then not being able to complete, not being able to go into a job market, not having enough skills. So what do we do with that? Our current open school only addresses the issue of passing the 10th grade exam. I think we need to do a little better than that. And there are two strategies that we are trying out right now. One is to work with the middle school and the secondary school children to upgrade their skills before they drop out. And then that way help them clear the 10th grade. But that doesn't solve the problem of their poor knowledge, poor skills and so on. So how can we combine the open school of education as we have it now with vocational training and add to it a component of maybe learning science, technology? Now this is something that I want to explore going forward. Some of the donors have actually expressed an interest in trying this out. Finally, I know many of you have been saying this, that we have not used technology enough in our programs. That is true. I think we are already trying some things. For example, right now there is an experiment on using cell phones to teach English, and we see a lot of enthusiasm among kids. We have not seen the results yet, it's too new, but I'd like to see it expand. We'll continue to explore use of cell phones in education. We've just started and it promises to be a good journey. We are also going to start looking at tablets, apps, and so on and so forth as we go along. But it's too early right now to say anything. It's an area that's going to grow. So, looking back, and we've traveled now 19, 20 years, there's some things very clear. External observers, friends, foes alike, will grant you that Pratham is all about scale. If Pratham doesn't work on scale, there's something wrong with it, then it's not Pratham. So clearly we'll work on scale. The difference is that this scale, once upon a time, was only the city of Mumbai. Then it became India, and I think next 10 years will see us going global. Exactly how? Will there be a Pratham Kenya? I don't think so. But there will be an alliance that we'll be able to build in many more countries to work together and pass on to them what we've learned here. The second thing about Pratham that almost invariably everybody talks about is that we are innovators. We are frugal innovators. That's what people tell us. And that's true. We are frugal because we don't have enough money. And we intend to stay that way, not spend too much of the money, because once you do that, somehow you tend to lose the value of that innovation, at least in the space that we are working in. So that, I think, innovation is almost a habit with us, because we come up with problems that have not been solved. We attack problems that have not been solved for decades. And if you do business as usual, then they're not going to be solved. So every time you step aside and take a different track, you're innovating. So we will continue to innovate. I think more and more people in Pratham will be engaged in solving problems. Finally, the one observation everybody has is that Pratham people, no matter where you go, and I'm sure it's true of Pratham USA as well, because I've seen it myself, is that Pratham is only full of good people, and good people who work with an ownership of the organization, not just as employees. They take lead, they take initiative, and I don't like to use cliched words, but they seem to be all empowered. Well, sometimes that means they tell me, we don't want to listen to you. That's possible. In my theory of conservation of power, there's only so much power in the world, and so if you want to empower somebody else, you have to disempower ourselves. So I guess I'm the least powered person in Pratham, but the beauty of that power is it flows back right at me, and so I get more and more powerful. So I think we are going to be all these three things. We'll be working on scale, we'll be frugal innovators, and we will always be a bunch of good people, fun-loving people who work not because somebody is forcing us, but because we just like to work and do good things. And that's not going to change about Pratham. So there it is. My 20 minutes are over, Denny. Thank you.